All right, welcome everyone. It's good to be here gathered together. There's a bit of a buzz in the room, I think, for a lot of obvious reasons, and we're all happy to be here, excited, looking forward to the prospects of what God has for us down the road at Mountain View, how we use us, and the possibility of Brian and Christy Hebert joining us. This handsome gentleman next to me, if you haven't met yet, he's been on a mission to shake as many hands as possible. You will get many opportunities this weekend, is Brian Hebert from Houston, Texas. And yeah, you want to grab that mic right there? And the family is sitting over here, but they don't want to be on display, so don't stare too much.
Yeah, you might have already met Jack. He's preceded me going through the room, and so if you can't remember Brian, just remember Jack's dad. I do respond to that.
Yeah. All right, so welcome also if you're on the live stream. We're glad that you could join us. The camera with the red light is where you look. Okay. So I'd just like to open tonight with a word of prayer and ask the Lord to be here and guide our conversation and the evening. Heavenly Father, we are grateful that where two or three are gathered, you're in our midst. And so we know you're here today. And we just ask that you would show up and be glorified in these questions. And as we get to know Brian and his family and explore the possibility of ministry together, life together, long into the future. We just thank you for everything you've done in this body, even through the hard times of the last couple of years. And we look forward to serving you, glorifying you as we move forward. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right, so here's how this evening is going to go. I'm going to start with some introductory questions. We will then go into what I call the lightning round, which will be speed answers. And then we'll get into some serious questions. And if we've got time at the end, a little bit we like to call here at Mountain View called Pronounce This Word. And we'll use the screen, and I think you know how this will go. All right. So just for starters, Brian, tell us a little bit about your family.
So we have a lot of kids. We've been married for 18 years. This is my wife, Christy. Say hi. And she puts up with me quite well, and I appreciate that about her. And then I have 3 girls and 2 boys. So Emily, raise your hand. There we go. Savannah. And Sophie. Where's Sophie? Okay. Oh, I'm sure not up to anything sketchy whatsoever. And so Benjamin, I don't see with her either. And then, as you've all met Jack, we'll reintroduce him. There's Jack also. So we live in Houston. We live in the International District in Houston. So when you think Texas, you might think cowboys. We ride a horse and all of that kind of stuff. Actually, we live in the middle of a pretty rough neighborhood, a very international neighborhood. Our kids go to schools there, and we're at a church of about 50 different nations right now in the International District. So that's kind of the short scoop on us.
All right. Tell us a little bit about meeting Jesus, kind of when the call to ministry came and what that looked like for you.
Yeah. My dad worked in oil. My family is originally from South Louisiana, which is why our name does not pronounce like it looks. And I'll pronounce the names that you have blacked out as soon as everybody here can say my name correctly. I'm just joking. I will. There we go. All right. Well, I guess I have to do it now. So I was born in Texas. We moved to Scotland when I was a kid, and I grew up there and became a believer there. My parents were longtime believers. And I kind of just grew up hearing the gospel. So parents who are reading the Bible to your kids every night, just stick with it. And taking your kids to VBS, stick with it. And so I'm one of those kids. And I just knew from very early on, I think some people are called into ministry later in life. For me, from as early as I can remember, I just knew that God wanted me to be in ministry. And it was really just a question of when or how. When we moved back from Scotland, I was 7, 8 years old at the time and had a plan to like reach my neighbor, friend, kids with the gospel, and God's just kind of opened doors all the way through. So we've served as a missionary family. We've served on church staffs. We've worked for nonprofits. I've worked in the secular workforce and done ministry from there. And so just really a lot of different kinds of things. In my mind, being in ministry is not about who's paying your bills or what your organization is, but what you're doing. And so I really see a lot of you as being in ministry as well, if you have the right mindset about that.
Cool. Tell us a little bit about your journey to this unique moment, schooling, ministries, even secular jobs that led you here.
Yeah. So my first school I went to was in North Carolina, where we had Emily. So she's our one out-of-state baby. We almost had Benjamin in Egypt, but that's a different story. So yeah, out of Bible college, we took a church position in the Hill Country in Texas, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. If you're familiar where San Antonio is, Alamo, maybe that'd be the biggest point of reference. We were nowhere near that, but that's the closest thing. We were in the part of Texas that you think of where like, oh, Texas looks like this. We actually lived in that part for a little bit.
Do you know where Hico is?
I do know where Hico is. We were not far from Hico.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Anyway, and so from there, I got into a seminary program that was you studied for 2 years, and you went overseas 2 years, and missions had been a big burden of mine for a long time. The church that my wife and I grew up at, for the most part, was very missions-focused. You'll probably hear a lot of examples from that church through sermon illustrations as we talk about, grace and legalism and reading the Bible and other kinds of things like that. But it did prepare us really to have a heart for the nations and to have a heart to share the gospel. And it was through that we took a position with a mission agency in the Middle East, and we lived there for a couple of years. We were there during the Arab Spring, so kind of some exciting times. You actually hear a lot in my preaching where I bring in Middle Eastern culture because the Bible is largely written in this context. And so it's helpful to understand the context when we understand the Bible. And then most recently, I graduated with a doctorate from Western Seminary out in Portland. I did that as a kind of traveling student program and just kind of fell in love with the Pacific Northwest. If you would have asked Christy or myself maybe 2-3 years ago, is Brian ever going to leave Houston? What's the answer? Yeah, it's not going to happen. And so just to be sitting here and just God to have led us through a process of going, okay, it's okay for God to change us from what we thought we were always going to be doing, and He's part of that. And so that's really been our journey in the last couple of years, is walking through that. It actually started for us in 2019, when at the end of 2019, where we said, you know what, we think maybe it's time that God wants us to do something different, and I don't know what, and I don't know where. And at the time, I also didn't know that I didn't know when, but I didn't know when, because early 2020, this little disease hit the world and changed everything. We thought, well, this is not the time. And then we lost our own pastor. I shouldn't say lost in that context, sorry. He took another position somewhere else. He's perfectly healthy. Yeah, so anyway, he stepped down from the senior pastorate role the same week that I was about to plan the meeting to say, hey, I think this is a year after COVID had hit, to say, hey, I think God is going to move us on at some point, and we're really praying through that. He beat me to the punch by about a day, and so he got to leave before I did. And so we thought, well, that's not the time either. But our church is an interim pastor now. It's doing great and is really helping our church out. And so it's, we got contacted by the church and have been in communication ever since. And here we are.
Yeah. I'll just tell a little bit of the story. So our journey has been a year and a half now without a senior pastor. And we went through the process in May of bringing in a candidate, and we were not at peace, the candidate was not at peace, and that was, was really clear as we were in the process of that, that maybe this isn't going forward. And at one point, Dale looked over at me and says, go scrub your list and see if we've got anybody still in the hopper. And so I was going through quickly, looking, and we had just before we got called the other candidate in, gotten your application. And so I quick went and looked at a sermon, and here's this guy in Texas in the Southern Baptist Church preaching in a suit. And I'm like, no, that won't work. And kept moving on. I'm like, no, we got to, we'll be starting over. I'm glad we kept your file on record. Okay, we're going to move on to the lightning round here. So I'm just going to holler out a couple things, and you
go
just
for it.
answer the first thing that comes to mind.
Oh boy.
All right.
Ready.
Latte or cappuccino?
Oh gosh, that's not a lightning round question. Cappuccino.
Okay. ESV or NIV?
Yes.
Chocolate or vanilla?
Chocolate.
Okay.
Of course, obviously.
DC or Marvel?
Marvel. But I do like Batman.
Yeah, okay. PC or Apple?
Jarvis.
Oh.
Emily, stand up and show them your shirt. You didn't know you were going to be modeling this. It says Stark Industries on it.
Yeah, all right. Yeah. Android or iPhone?
iPhone.
Okay.
Sorry, Android.
All right. Pumpkin pie or apple pie?
Apple pie.
All right. And the most important, Seahawks versus Texans.
Ooh.
Sunday afternoon. We could not have written that.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go with the Texans.
Okay.
Sorry.
Might need
I'm
to work on
actually
that.
ambivalent, but
Okay. All right, so some more serious questions. Okay, this came in from the congregation. Should we be encouraging people to keep attending church in their pajamas or come back into the building, and why?
Are people wearing pajamas to church really a problem here?
We are
you
a
mean
bit
staying
more
at home?
Yeah, we are a bit more casual, but not quite
Yeah, I'd
that
heard about the
casual.
relaxed dress
Yeah.
code. I didn't know that included pajamas. Am I allowed to wear pajamas?
Yeah, probably not on Sunday morning. Yeah.
I'm just offering. I'm throwing it out there. That's all. I think it's really important to gather as a church. I think there are certain non-tangible things when we come together. I love to teach and preach. I think small group Bible study is great. There are all these great kind of functions that seem very self-contained. But when we sit and we talk together, a lot of times there's a component of discipleship that we never would have discovered just by watching the sermon. I'm also aware, and we should all be aware, that none of us are the best at any of the stuff that we do. And so if you're going to, I'm very aware that if you're just going to sit at home and watch a sermon, there's probably more interesting, better preachers, better put together sermons than what I can do. But I think just that kind of non-tangible side of when we meet together and when we fellowship together. This is why I love doing home group in homes and including a meal as part of it. And people go, Brian, why do you tell people do a meal for home group? It's not scientific. I can't show you this on a chart. I just know when people sit down and eat together, it's a different conversation that you have. And then real life, deeper issues and a much deeper connection come out of that. And I think church is should be the same kind of experience. And I know even for those who have been gathering during this time, it's felt very different where, you have to be masked and distanced and everything might feel a little bit strange. I come from a church, we're very warm cultured. And so we have lots of Latinos, lots of people from different African nationalities. So any given Sunday, I get lots of handshakes, even more hugs, and on occasion, kisses by both men and women, depending on where they are from. And so to go from that to we just stand and do the whole, like we're a puppet on a stick. It feels really weird. And so even showing up during this time hasn't maybe had the same quality that we are used to or that we might seek out. But I think there's something to be said for those non-tangible, non-predictable things that happen. Where you see the look on somebody's face sitting next to you, you go, hey, are you okay? Is everything all right this week? Or someone's just overjoyed and they're able to share that joy. There's just so many things that can happen that isn't from the stage downward, but is just mutually shared, that's communally shared between all of us.
So also coming in from the congregation, cultural battle lines are being drawn at every turn. How does a pastor address that in their sermon selections?
Yeah, I grew up at a church. If you think of people like boats, okay, think of a battleship. Battleships got like really big guns, and If you have a gun, everything looks like a target. If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I grew up at a church that was like that. It was a battleship church of, creationism and pro-life, or pick the church, pick the battles, and that's kind of their mentality. Or you have others that's like you're the fireboat, and like your job is to go and put out fires. Is anybody here familiar with a French guy named Jacques Cousteau? Yeah, I grew up on watching his. It was a TV show, I guess. I was a kid. I don't remember. He had that series, The Underwater World of Jacques Cousteau. Yeah, I used to have the whole series. It's getting a lot of nods. I've used this illustration before, and people are like, Jacques who? But his boat Calypso was really cool because he went around the world. If you study the history of the boat, it started in one of the world wars. And then it became a ferry boat, and then it got finally repurposed for his research team, and it had a helicopter, and it had the rubber dinghy, and it had a submarine that you could drop off. And it was like a go anywhere and do anything kind of boat. And I think, we as a church, we as Christians in the modern world, we were just talking about this over dinner about how our kids, even more so than us, are facing issues in the world that I didn't even discover were issues till college, that they are now just thrown into the midst of. They've got to be like Calypso, where they are able to go anywhere and do anything and talk to anybody. We have to be well-versed in all of these issues. And so I think there's room for the church to stay grounded and be exploratory. And so I teach this from children to adults. We cannot be ashamed of the gospel. We cannot be ashamed of our identity in Christ. We have to hold that up beyond anything else. But also, we have to love everyone no matter what. And we tend to pick one side or the other side. Very few people do both well, where we stay focused on truth and stay focused on loving each other or loving the other, whoever the other is to you. And we see this in Jesus, where he is the embodiment of all truth in human form. He's the fullness of the Godhead dwells in him bodily. This is Colossians. And yet we see that he died for the world, for a world that hated him, for a world that didn't know that they needed him, that didn't want him, that would have rather he never step into their space. He died for them. And so we see Jesus obviously model this perfectly, and we're imperfect. But he modeled this exclusive truth but inclusive love in a way that I think the church has got to get better at balancing both of those things together, where we don't lose the battle on truth. It's not about winning or losing that battle, but we can follow the truth and love our neighbor, and these are not counter-exclusive.
So you've personally had to wrestle through some of this yourself. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that journey for us really started, when we went into the Muslim world as missionaries, where, think of our high school year was 9/11. We're watching, a massive terrorist attack happen. But more than learning how to love who we perceived at the time to be our enemies, to the point of sharing, going to that part of the world and sharing the gospel, it transformed us into realizing, hey, this whole battleship mentality that we've had growing up, where we've got to seek out falsehood and then destroy it and destroy the people who are defending it too, that transformed us. And in my own family, we've had to struggle with this. I'm one of 7 kids. So there's 4 boys. I'm the oldest boy, third child, but oldest boy. And 3 of us are preachers, and 1 of us is not. And we grew up in a very conservative home, and my youngest brother several years ago came out to the family, and it was a moving time for us. Every sibling had a different way of interacting with him. I used to have a really awesome food blog. I love to eat food. Everybody does, or you die, but I really like it. Yeah. I know I look like I'm a runner, but I really just love to eat. And we only did international food. And so it was me, Brian, the anthropologist, culture student, writing about the cultural side of food, and my younger brother, who is a professional photographer, taking pictures of the food. And this was the basis for our relationship for years and years and years until he moved away from Houston. And it was challenging to love him through this. And I think sometimes we think of, well, love is just pure acceptance. Or we think of, well, love is, man, I'm gonna bring the heat, and I think love is walking with people on a journey with them. And so in keeping the relationship open, I was able to share a lot with him, just kind of as his big brother. And that's what I told him. I said, look, I recognize that, you've said this. I recognize that this is who you are, but I've always been your big brother. I've always had a relationship with you. I've always spoken into your life, and I'm not going to stop now. And I think he appreciated that. And so, through the years, we've had a lot of really deep conversations about all kinds of things in his life. And we were having those conversations beforehand. And so I think it's easy. I think he felt like some people only cared about him once he made this announcement. They only wanted to get involved in and speak into his life on that one issue. And he's still a whole person. I think when we realize people are made in God's image, and it doesn't matter your gender, your ethnicity, your religion, your pronoun, your sports team, your phone choice, right? At some point, we're all made in God's image, and that cuts through all of these layers of barriers and separation that we have kind of in a human way constructed. And it's just incredible when you start with that as your starting point with everybody, how far you can get in conversation.
Thanks for that. Okay, so you've listened to the podcast, The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, and many of us in this room have, and it's been something we've talked about a lot. And that happened right here in our own backyard. We have people here tonight that are survivors of the Mars Hill meltdown. Just kind of curious, what was your biggest takeaway from that podcast?
We could talk for hours about this. I love the podcast. I have, for not being from the area, never having gone to his church, my own interaction or experience of Mark was very, very different, and at a time in my life when it was very helpful. So growing up at the church we grew up at, when I went to, the first school I went to was a Southern Baptist school, my church broke fellowship with me because it was a liberal Southern Baptist school. It was not all liberal, okay? But that was where we were coming from, right? So liberal to them meant some of the professors used NIV, and they would play praise songs in the chapel, right? Okay, so that's what liberal was. And really what changed me was studying missions. Like I learned, like when God became flesh, he took on human flesh. He looked human. He looked Jewish. He looked first century Jewish. He took on a culture as well. And so this incarnational process where there was a lot in culture that's wrong, and he didn't sin in any way, but there were a lot of things that were neutral or could be redeemed that Jesus sounded like them. He probably had an accent. He probably did his hair like they did, his clothes like they did. And I was taught, if you have local clothes, local haircut, whatever, that's worldliness. Well, I start studying missions, and I realized my whole life I've heard our pastor praise these guys, men and women who went overseas, and they went to India or they went to China, and then they were unsuccessful for a long time, and then they started cutting their hair like the locals cut their hair, and they started wearing local clothes, and they even built their buildings to look like local buildings, and these were amazing missionaries. And there was a dissonance with, but if you do that here, you're just buying into the worldly culture. It's a slippery slope. Who knows what's next? You're going to start reading NIV probably. And I mean, that sent me on a journey that really changed, really changed my life and how I saw a lot of things. And so at this time when I'm doing this, sorry, I know this sounds like a really roundabout way. At this time, like when my church is breaking fellowship with me, you go, how do people get into cults? It wasn't an actual cult, but it had some very authoritarian type things. You go, how do people get into cults? Well, if you grow up in one, you don't know you're in one. If you ever have to ask, am I in a cult? You're probably in a cult. That's just a good barometer. But if your pastor, your parents, all your friends, all your Sunday school teachers, every respected adult in your life goes, this is the right way to interpret the Bible, you go, okay. Well, now I'm interpreting it this new way of going, wait a second. All of these things that were cultural Christian norms that may not be actually explicitly taught in Scripture, I'm ready to go, hey, we can change this, and that's okay. We can still be devoted to truth and change this. Man, I felt alone. I felt abandoned. And then out from the other side of North America, I hear this guy named Mark Driscoll. Didn't know who he was. He actually came and spoke at our seminary. So there's an episode where he talks about the Gospel Coalition and some of these big name, more broadly accepted names kind of taking him under their wing. That was said to us at school, and our school was part of that. And so, I heard probably a dozen sermons and read Radical Reformation, and for the first time I felt like, okay, I'm not necessarily wrong in this. There's someone else that sees the Bible this way, that sees that we should engage in culture. And so my first interaction with Mark was a very positive, affirming thing of camaraderie. I was shocked later to hear, what happened in kind of broad detail, and then to hear it all in the podcast. It's just been heartbreaking, really. And I think, the last episode he's talking a lot about the gospel and how many gospel-centric churches wind up saying, well, really do more, try harder. We're a gospel-centered church, but you really need to step up your game, which is not what the gospel is. The gospel is I can't do it, but Jesus can, and that's what I need. And I think, honestly, his life is, ironically, a proof of that even as smart and eloquent sounds weird, but like he just had a certain way with words that for my generation was, we got it. It's really sad. So one of my takeaways is that anybody can go off the rails. Every single one of us is capable of every single sin. And when we forget that, we wind up putting someone up on a pedestal, or we put ourselves on a pedestal, and that's a very dangerous place to be. But I think, again, there's more to life than being right. We have to express that in a way that's also loving. And whether that's just the style in which it's expressed, or the actual words, or the ideas even, we have to be very careful how that comes across, particularly in a place like the Pacific Northwest. I mean, it's a different place out here.
Yeah, thanks for that. Hey, this also came in from the congregation. How do you keep life groups from becoming life cliques? And what do you think is the secret sauce for a super healthy life group?
That's difficult, because when you're in a life group, you're really on a journey together, and you don't want to click, because that's also bad. It's a real challenge to walk that tightrope. And I know with several small groups that we've been a part of, that we've hosted in our home, the things that people have shared. Anytime we would have a visitor from the outside, actually a little bit cautious about bringing in visitors, because it would mess with the dynamics of the group. We called it a no tourist policy. And so the idea of a tourist is like, you're here to kind of take pictures, get a cool story, and then you're going to go talk about it. Well, I'm not going to share my deep life issues that I need your help with if I know this is just going to go up on your travel blog. And so we would welcome people in who wanted to take the same plunge with us. And so we kind of set the bar high in terms of commitment. And I have not, to be fair, I've not replicated this style of group a whole lot. It is hard to do that. But I think getting people to have a very deep commitment to the group. I mean, we would sit down and have a very formal talk with people of, look, here's what we expect. And then we would do this odd thing that a lot of people today don't do, called accountability, and light public shaming. But we'll put that under accountability, because that sounds more Christian.
It's a 20th century pillory post.
But no, I mean, when we say, look, if you're not going to be there, that's okay. We get it. We all have jobs. We all travel. We would use an app to have everybody talk together and plan meals and all that kind of stuff. Like, look, just it in advance, say it in advance. It's a respect thing. And you have to have some awkward conversations. I was homeschooled. I have a really high tolerance for awkward conversations. And so I think sometimes community life means we have to politely and lovingly confront people and say, hey, you're supposed to communicate that, or you didn't show up, or we have to be honest. Hey, I didn't show up. So I think in terms of not becoming cliques, it's very helpful if you have an outwardly focused mission beyond just being a fellowship group. I think that's one way of helping avoid the cliques. In terms of secret sauce, I think there's multiple elements, but creating a place of hospitality, which is essentially making room for people. And a lot of the people came to our home group because we were very focused on a very specific mission. And while they received the training, the Bible training, the lessons, etc., that related to that, I think what they found was family. And that's really why they stayed. And they would stay and go through, whenever we'd have a new person come in, there was a certain kind of orientation process we would go through, and it's kind of that, you're building a team, the storming, forming, norming process, and it was the same kind of thing with a home group. And they were willing to do that because they saw all of us as family to them. And so I think creating that kind of family environment, even using the language of family, can be very, very helpful. And also meals. Meals are great.
Rule of thumb for the fellowship portion versus the study portion, just
in terms of time?
Yeah.
It was kind of 50-50 for us. Now, our home group, we would meet 5 hours.
That's doing life together.
3 hours. I'm gonna keep lowering the number until there's no more groaning, just to figure out what your tolerance is. Look, one thing you're gonna learn about me is I don't do things halfway, okay? I'm just not a halfway kind of guy. You're gonna see this Sunday, trust me. I'm not gonna ruin it, but you'll see it Sunday. So people would show up at various times. We say, look, the doors are open at this time. If you want to come hang out and do whatever, that's fine. And then we're going to eat at this time. And then, there'd be some talk around the meal. And then we would do Bible study. And some people had to leave early because they, wake up like 4 a.m. to commute in for a job. And that was fine. Others would stay. So it was not always our choice. Sometimes it's easier to participate in a home group than host one. Sometimes it wasn't always our choice, but like when someone's sitting on our sofa pouring their heart out to us about all of this stuff, we had some very, very late nights where we were lightly held hostage in our own home. But again, it's part of family. It's like when your teenager's ready to talk, you don't go, oh man, but it's really time for bed right now. You go, okay, this is when you're choosing to talk. Let's do it. Let's do it. So, yeah.
All right, thanks. Hey, what are your thoughts on keeping a higher percentage of visitors? How do we keep people from coming in the front door and walking out the back door?
Yeah. I think you need to know why people are here. And when you know that, it's not a numbers game anymore, and it's not even necessarily about keeping people. And I think a lot of churches, one of the kind of side volunteer jobs I had during seminary days, I worked at one of our denominational offices, and I got to see some church planting plans. And so these young church planters have these plans, and it was very much, we're going to build up, build the church bigger. And if you ask the question, why? Well, why would you want a bigger church? Oh, because then we can do more for the kingdom. Okay, that seems pretty obvious. Well, then what happens? Oh, well, then we can build a bigger church, an even bigger church. Okay, well, then what? Well, then we can do more. Okay, well, do more what? Oh, we can build a bigger church, right? Houston and Texas has tons of mega churches. They're everywhere. And it's this mentality of growth for growth's sake itself. And I think a lot of times we just need to have a clearly defined vision. I'm neither a pro-growth person or an anti-growth person. I think if we have a vision of what God is calling us to do, and this is at our forefront, I would much rather God give us the right people that understand that vision and are interested in being equipped and committed to that vision than simply give us 1,000 more people that are really just there to consume. And that's another problem we have where I'm from, is just consumer Christianity, where the church is expected to provide basketball teams and just every amenity, honestly, that the world provides. And nothing wrong with those things. I'm not knocking that. I just think the church should provide things that only the church can provide. So I think part of it is really just kind of defining who we are and what God has called us to do, and then going, okay, maybe this isn't for you. Maybe there's another church that has exactly what you're needing that you can jump in and serve at. That's not a bad conversation to have with people. I have that conversation all the time when people are, deciding, hey, I don't know that Willcrest, our church, is the right place for me. And I listen to them. I go, hey, I actually know this church that's, one, not a 40-minute drive for you. Can't believe you're commuting like that. And two, is actually exactly what you need. They're part of the kingdom. We're part of the kingdom. Man, God's blessing. Go there. The flip side, though, is I think there are a lot of times where, and this can happen in a place where everybody already knows everybody, is when you're the new person. This goes back to that word hospitality. Hospitality is not just fellowship. It's not just I have you over for dinner. It is making room. And people need to know when they're coming in as the outsider that there's a place where they have room and where they can belong. And so again, this has to be part of an attitude of hospitality and awareness of being outside of. You can have cliques that aren't just home groups, right? You can have cliques of, well, I sit in this pew, or I sit in this section of the sanctuary, and these 5 other family, we all sit there, and then we all go get lunch, and you don't look to the pew right next to you and go, oh, I wonder where they go get lunch. I wonder what they do on Friday night, you know? And so I think when we see the new person come in and we welcome them, and more than that, we invite them into our lives, it creates a space for them. And when people have space and they have a purpose and they have a community, that leads to some really long and deep relationships. The challenge then is that becomes the new clique, and so you have to keep that going of, all right, now that you're the new person, now that you're no longer the new person, you have to keep your eyes out to who's God bringing in. And I don't just think we should think of who's God bringing through the door. I think it's who's God bringing and who works in the cubicle next to you. That's a new person that needs you to make room. Who's God bringing that's your new neighbor? We have to think in these other contexts, who walks through the doors is great, but they're honestly kind of an easy target. The more post-Christian America becomes, the more we have to think about the marketplace, the neighborhood, third places, these kinds of things. And so making room in those spaces is very, very essential. And I think adds a value that other people don't think about. Because, think about the workplace. For most people, it's I'm here to make as much money as I can. I'm here to self-promote. I'm here to be the guy on top. I'm here to, it's all just this climb the ladder mentality, and it's almost at the expense of those around me. If I can throw an elbow in the race to get to the top, and you trip and take a fall, and I take the next rung of the ladder, well, kudos to me. Survival of the fittest. And to be in the workplace, there's a lot of opportunities for us to make room for people. Also, work brings in people from around the world, and so this connects the church with the marketplace, with global missions. So there's just a lot of synergy that you can have when you adopt this kind of mentality.
All right, thank you. Lost my place. Okay, so what are your thoughts on ministry by women in the church? How has the debate between complementarian and egalitarian done us a disservice? And where do you draw the line for women in ministry?
Yeah, good question.
It was actually 3, but just launch into your whole.
I was just going to pick the easiest one and ignore the other 2, but thanks for calling me out. This has been a really challenging topic for a lot of churches, and obviously coming from a more Baptistic tradition. Most of the churches that we've been a part of aren't, I wouldn't say they aren't affirming of women in ministry. They are, but it's in particular roles and whatnot. In my own church, I've tried to push the boundaries of what's acceptable on that in my circle, which probably isn't that far for you guys, but I love to train leaders. I love to. This comes from Ephesians 4, that God gave the apostles and the prophets and the teachers and the shepherds to the church, to the saints, to train the saints for the work of the ministry. Ephesians 4:11. This is kind of my model for how I think about a lot of things that I do. So we had a guy step down from one of our Sunday school classes, and kind of by the next Sunday, somebody had to be there. So I said, look, I'll do it, but I don't just want to do a regular Sunday school class. I want to train leaders. Who in our church has the gift of teaching, and put them in here, or who wants to see if they have it, wants to discern this. Put them in this class. On the side, I'll be working with them, teaching them how do we read the Bible? How do we lead people? And so we had 4 books that they were going to read through that year, and on different various topics about Christian leadership or teaching or whatever. And then there would be a rotation of who taught that Sunday school class, and so it just provided the opportunity. And I would sit there kind of like was done to me in seminary preaching class, where you just sit there with a piece of paper that has how do they do gestures, how are their points, how was their organization, was anything distracting, and I would sit down with them the next week and just give them honest feedback. The part like, well, what's the big deal, Brian? The part that went further was I said, you know what, we need to train the women who are teachers in our church. And I don't really think our pastor liked that idea very much. And But my argument was, look, if we don't train women, what we're saying is we're okay with untrained women teaching the Bible. So I don't have an agenda necessarily that women teach. I don't have an agenda that women don't teach. I do have an agenda that everyone who teaches should be trained. We shouldn't have men who are untrained teaching the Bible. That's a dangerous thing. And so it's less about gender and it's more about calling, gifting, preparedness, etc. And so our church is, back home, is 2/3 women. Part of this is where our neighborhood is. We have a lot of fatherlessness is a huge, huge problem throughout just our entire area, our broader area. And this impacts the church. And so on the one hand, we need male leaders. That's actually the area we're lacking in. We have amazingly gifted female leaders at multiple levels inside our church existing. We're actually really lacking the other side. And again, it's a cultural phenomenon for us. But I think there's a lot of really great opportunities where women can and should lead in the church. And I think you can either go one way or the other, where you make it about gender or you make it about quotas, and I don't think that's biblical. I think we should make it about who's God calling. And there are times where we need women to step up. There are times where we need women to step up, depending on what it is and depending on who's stepping up and who's not. It shouldn't be about an agenda to me. But
All right, thanks. You spent some time studying us, and I know this because we've had lots of questions back and forth. I'm just curious, anything you were surprised to learn about us, the Pacific Northwest, or the area?
I don't know anything surprised. I certainly learned a lot of new things about the Alliance. Alliance is not very big in Texas. And so my sister actually was a music leader at an Alliance church in the Northeast, in Maine, Massachusetts.
Pennsylvania by any chance?
No, not Pennsylvania. Massachusetts. So that was really my only interaction. And then my supervisor for my doctoral program was also Alliance, Enoch Wan. I don't know how broadly he's known throughout the area, but in the missions world, he's kind of a big deal. And I was just really enjoyed learning a lot about the Alliance and where they are on things like missions and being outwardly focused and other things like that. So that's been really great. It's interesting, the impression of the Northwest outside of the Northwest is all focuses on what you see in the media, right? So imagine what makes the news and heads down south, right? You're probably not far off. So it's kind of interesting. We were driving down the road yesterday and saw a Trump flag, or not yesterday, today, saw a Trump flag hanging on the side of the road, which where I'm from is fairly common. I was like, wow, that's kind of bold up here.
A bit less common.
A bit less common up here, yeah. I'm pretty, if you try to pin me down in politics, I'm kind of a political atheist.
How very Gen X of you.
I'm technically a millennial. I'm like the oldest millennial you can be. World's oldest millennial. There you go. That's my claim to fame. We don't like labels either, but I'm kind of around the bubble, you're right. So it's been interesting to just kind of see. I'm very excited. I mean, this place is known for, the Northwest is known for not having as many churches or being one of the least church areas of the country, and yet I still see a lot of churches around. And so that's encouraging. And I mean, look at you guys. You're all here through a pandemic, and you're excited about ministry. And a lot of the questions and conversations I've had with some of you on the side have been, we really want to reach our community better. And we really have to think about, how do we do this better? And how do we be more evangelistic? Or how do we engage with this particular hard group or that particular hard group? And I think that's really exciting.
Have you noticed any strengths or weaknesses just as you've had a chance to observe? Let me rephrase it. If you weren't a candidate, if you were instead a consultant that was here, and had spent time looking in through the window, kind of like you have, is there anything you've noticed from a strengths or weakness standpoint that you can?
Yeah, I'd probably give you the advice that you need to find somebody from Texas that's sort of Baptist-y, but very... Sorry, that was an easy one. You are on the front side of a cultural trend that is going to sweep America. where we are on a different side of a very similar and yet different trend. So whereas the Northwest is becoming less religious overall, our city in particular is becoming more religious overall, but it's not Christian religion. And in both cases, places, I don't know that, have Christians ever been in the majority up here? I don't think so, right?
I don't think so.
Okay. In the South, they have been in the majority, so they're feeling this deep sense of loss of we're not in the majority anymore. How do we get back? At the same time, everything that they're trying to do doesn't seem to work. And I think, well, there's great lessons to be learned from other places. So I'm not afraid of secular culture. I'm not afraid of postmodernism. I'm not afraid of of the culture here moving into post-Christianity. And I really think that's happening nationwide because I've read Acts. And in Acts, it starts with a very small group of people, and then the Holy Spirit comes in Acts 2. The Holy Spirit was always there, but comes in a new way in Acts 2, and then this massive movement against an empire that thought that their leader was God in the flesh, in a place where there were all kinds of pagan cults that did all kinds of pagan rituals. The gospel exploded from there. And what I see in places that have too strong a majority kind of God and country mindset, it's very easy to just want to rely on the culture to support the gospel. And you don't realize until there's some major crisis that the culture is not supporting the gospel. And so the thing that I would encourage this church in the future, if I were a consultant, is lean into this. God has put you here. I go down to Costa Rica every couple of years, or a couple times a year, some years, and work with a group called YWAM down there. I think you guys know them. And there's a young man from Norway down there. And I got to read his journal and noticed that he has like some pretty severe anger issues and all kind of stuff was going on. So I said, hey man, what's up? What's happening? And he starts telling me a story about his dad worked for Salvation Army, which in Europe, I didn't know this. In Europe, Salvation Army is like a mission agency. I mean, where we're from, it's just a thrift shop. I don't know what it is up here. Is it a thrift shop here, or is it an agency?
It's probably both, but
okay.
Everybody sees.
Yeah, but it's like he was a missionary or a pastor or like some weird combination of both, and this huge problem happened. Like his dad was accused of something that wasn't true, and I mean, this really shook his faith. His dad was fine with it, right? But it shook his faith. Comes down to Costa Rica, and I kind of stayed in contact with him. I said, look, here's my number. I want you to give me a call every couple of months. Let's just check in and see how you're doing. And when he went back to Norway, he says, I really felt like I was so close to God in Costa Rica. I was such a great missionary there. I was this, I was that. We'd go out in the street, we'd share the gospel, and we'd see things happen. And here I'd struggle to practice my faith. And I said, Daniel, where you are, I said, let's just open Operation World or any of the books that talk about Norway. And it's a fraction of a percent of people that are Christian. He goes, yeah, you're right. He goes, here, they talk about me like I'm some person in history that they've read about in a history book but never met. And I said, you already know Norwegian. Imagine me trying to learn that. You already know the culture. You're already there. You don't need a visa. You don't need everything that it would take a missionary to get to where you're at. So the only thing you're lacking is a vision to be a missionary to Norway. And I think it's the same thing here. You already know the culture. You know the language. You know the people. You're in the businesses. You're in the schools. You're in the neighborhoods. And so if you can just think, God has got enough people here. We don't need bigger facilities. We don't need even more Christians to get the job done. A lot of times when we think about how's God going to do this, he already has the pieces in play. We just might not be thinking like that. We might be distracted.
Okay. Another question came in from the congregation. Does the church have a role in mental health?
On which side of it?
That's all that was said.
That's a very broad and open question. I think for a lot of us who've grown up in the church, it does have a role in some negative traits.
I blame it for a lot of my mental health issues.
So let me just say I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist I'm not that kind of doctor. So I want to speak to my area of expertise and not others. I think mental health is a huge issue any day of the week, but particularly coming out of COVID. There are a lot of there are a lot of small issues that have been magnified. Like there's fractures a lot of times in a structure. When a structure falls down, it doesn't just magically happen overnight. A lot of times the fractures or the design flaws were there all along, and then finally there was too much stress, too much weight, too much pressure, and that's when that moment finally happened. But the recipe for the disaster was there oftentimes way before you saw the results. And I think the pandemic, the lockdown, people's loss of identity, purpose, the restlessness, the aimlessness, the fear, the anxiety, all of the stuff that's happened during COVID is an example of how we used a lot of things to prop ourselves up that weren't very strong props. And when those were taken away, a lot of people, and I don't mean out there in the world, I mean in the church, a lot of people suffer from the same, again, we're all made in God's image. We all suffer from the same problem in life, which is sin and brokenness. And so just being Christian doesn't magically spare you from any kind of mental health thing. There's been a lot of pastors break during this time. So I'm just kind of Baptish. My brother's very Baptastic. He's the poster child for Southern Baptist. I used to call him the poster child. He texted me a picture the other day. He went to Southern Seminary, which is like the flagship Southern Baptist seminary. And he is literally on one of their posters in a fancy, I love my brother, but we're at very opposite ends of many spectrums. And he's just doing this very preacherly, like this in the picture. He just graduated his doctorate, and all of his kids just roasted him. They stood next to that poster, and they're all like doing this at it. But he sends me, for a while, it was like a video a week of prominent pastors standing in the pulpit, grown men just weeping, talking about brokenness and everything that's come through COVID and the fights that have happened and disunity and disloyalty and everything in their church. So, it hits at every single level. The church's role, there are many cases where people come into my office and they say, hey, I need counsel about this. And I usually say, look, I'll tell you what the Bible says, and I'll refer you to professionals. That's what I do. So I think there is a spiritual component where a lot of times our spiritual life is out of whack. I've experienced this myself as a missionary. When we came back from the field, we were very, very damaged in ways that I wasn't even aware until later. And, it took a long time to heal from that. And some of those issues were spiritual. Some were physical. Some were, there was a whole list of things. It's like, I don't think mental health is a sin, but in many ways, sins don't just magically happen out of the air. They happen with a long series of very small choices until you finally get to some major kind of sin where everybody goes, wow, I had no idea. Well, you did. All the little lies that they told along the way, all the little ways that they were selfish, all the little ways that this happened and this and this and this. And so you can't just say, well, confess this sin and now your life goes back to normal. You've got to kind of figure out, well, how did you get all the way here? All right, let's start going back through all of those things. And I think mental health can be the same way, where we get into all kinds of patterns, and the spiritual element is one of them. So I don't want to take that out and say the church has no role. I just want to recognize there's a broader role that sometimes simply reading more Bible, studying more scripture, stitching a verse on a pillow and looking at it every day, like it may not fix the problem any more than the advice of, hey, just get over it, or don't feel bad, or it's not that bad, I had it worse. Like all those kind of helpful tips that people tell us it's not the sole solution. So I would say there's space for the church to be involved in this, in that we can provide true community. We can provide the answer to what is our real identity. But I also recognize there are a lot of cases that are very, very difficult, that relate to a lot of deeper things that often, the church is not necessarily well equipped to handle.
All right. As we were sitting here talking, I think I recognized a hole in my question, so I'm going to go off script a little bit here. Just tell us a little bit about your current jobs, and I say that with a plural because you do a lot.
Yes. So one of the jobs that's not on my resume, actually, one of my neighbors thought I was a professional woodworker. Because I was always out in the driveway doing different woodworking projects. And one of them was talking to my wife, and they go, oh, so your husband, does he not have that job doing the furniture building or woodworking or whatever it was he was doing? She goes, that's not his job, that's just a hobby. I don't do things halfway. So, yeah. But anyway, in terms of actual real jobs, I'm the mission pastor at a multi-ethnic church, and so that's kind of my main job and responsibilities. But some of the fun things that I've been doing on the side as well. I'm a professor at Houston Baptist University, HBU, which we jokingly internally call Hindu Buddhist University, because in the current Bible class I'm teaching, I probably only have 3 students that are believers, I think. And I think most of the rest of them, I know most of the rest of them are just culturally Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, agnostic, atheist, pragmatist. I mean, you name the ists, we've got them all. And so it's really fun to teach Bible in that context. But I also teach an intercultural studies program there as well. And so that's kind of my main other outside job. But I've done a lot of other things where there's people I mentor that aren't connected to either of those, who are interested in going in mission or interested in working with Muslims in Houston or abroad. And so I have a lot of other things like that I just do socially for fun.
All right, great. Okay, so that's the sum total of the harder or the hardish questions. We have a little segment now that we'd like to invoke called Pronounce This Word, and it's specifically designed to trip you up. You might get a couple of them right. Yeah. So, okay, if we turn around and look at the screen here.
Yeah, that way they can't see my face of shame.
Right.
See, I see the double L and I think of Y in Spanish, but something tells me that's not.
Well, for starters, pronounce it like a Texan.
Okay, these are speed round questions, right? Like, I mean, cappuccino versus latte. There's so many things about coffee that you can't. It's not an either or. Anyway,
it's got y'all in the middle of it.
Oh, it does. I didn't even see that. I can barely read. Ironically, I kind of hate to read. I'd say Puyallup.
Oh, that's pretty close. That beats Steve.
What is it?
It's Puyallup.
Pew. Along you.
All right. What do we got next?
Wait. Go back. Why is one U long and the other is short?
Ask the Native Americans.
Oh, but they say they don't have grammar. Okay. Stillaguamish?
Yeah. Yeah. You're doing pretty good. Way better than Steve.
Yeah, but now I just have so much farther to fall. Oh, gosh. High before E except after C. It doesn't even help here. Hoquiam?
Hoquiam. Yeah, very good.
I want to put like an S8. I want to move the S in front. I mean, it'd be like Stecken or something like that, but that's not right. I'm a little bit dyslexic.
Stehekin.
Stehekin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dale's taking a hike up there.
Spokane.
Yeah, the E is silent.
Wenatchee?
Wenatchee. Yeah. All right.
Oh, that one. Herbert.
All right. All right, we're an hour in. I think there are some refreshments. So Brian will this is the part of the evening where Brian starts working the room. We'll let you get something to eat, though. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
There will be another round of questions on Sunday night. So obviously you're going to be back here and preaching on Sunday, and both services. And then in the evening, I don't have the times memorized. 5 for dinner, 6:15 for Q&A. And I think we get to have Christy join you for some of the questions. So, it'll be a little bit lighter. We're not going to be asking, your take on
sports teams,
the age of the world or anything like Genesis 1 or anything. Who's got the directions on dessert tonight? Somebody? Anyone? Who's in charge? Kathy? There's brownies. So go get something to eat. Not everybody will get a chance to, mob Brian for a half an hour each, but sure. Let's let the kids go first. And what's that? You can take your masks off while you eat. Yes. That is approved by Snohomish County Health Authority. While you're actively eating. Okay. And the dinner is at 5 on Sunday. The question and answer will be at 6:15. We hope to see you all back. See you, everyone.